Hello and welcome to Access Matters. My name is Rebecca Potts and I head up the Access Matters initiative for Vuelio, Responsibles and Pulsar. We launched Access Matters last July to encourage listening, sharing of experience, learning from best practice and collaboration on the actions that will have the greatest positive impact for our industry. Today, we're joined by the brilliant Sarah Atkinson, Chief Executive of the Social Mobility Foundation. Good morning, Sarah.
Good morning. Hi, everyone.
Sarah will talk to us about the work the charity does to provide opportunities for young people who don't have the support network at home or in school and how we can all advocate for social mobility. So before I hand over to Sarah, I'd like to remind everyone that we are encouraging engagement, so please do submit questions using the Q&A tab on your screen or in the chat for all to see, and Sarah will try to answer as many as she can. Please feel free to join the conversation on Twitter using the hashtag #AccessMatters. And as with our previous session, we're going to run a poll, but this time we're going to ask a slightly different question of, have you ever felt discriminated against due to your social background? It's anonymous and we'd love for you to take part so we can look at the results later. But for now, it's over to you, Sarah.
Lovely. Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, everyone. It's great to have this opportunity to talk to you about the social mobility problem that we have in the UK. It is a problem that we have. If you're a low ability child from a high income family, you are 35% more likely to be a high earner than a high ability child from a low income family. There are lots of stats that show only 12% of chief execs are from working class origins. You're twice as likely to become an accountant. You're 17 times more likely to become a lawyer. You're 24 times more likely to become a doctor if you've got a parent who's in one of those professions. So something is not working. Talent is not making as much of a difference as your background. And obviously, because of the job I do, you would expect me to think that's a moral problem, and I do. I feel angry about what we're saying to young people, that their background will define them. I think we all felt angry last summer when students from low-performing schools were marked down by the exams algorithm. That sort of thing happens to the young people we work with every day. Their background it counts against them, and it outweighs their talent. I think it's also a social problem. You've got groups of young people or whole communities in some cases that are left behind from success, from aspiration. That's not a healthy thing for our society, and it's not a healthy thing for our economy. Businesses in every sector, and PR is no exception, consistently say, getting talent, retaining talent, growing talent is the big issue. If we're wasting the potential of people who come from a low-income background, a mess. And of course in PR, if you don't have if everyone in the room comes from the same sort of background, your ability to engage and understand the public is going to have something missing. So look, I know I'm talking to a group who's hearing this conversation because you recognise that this is a problem and you want to kind of talk about change. So I'm not going to lecture you about the need to prioritise social mobility. I'm going to talk a bit about how to approach it, the work that we do, and some of the kind of practical ways to make change. And then it'd be great to get some kind of questions and conversation going about how some of this can work. But look, at first, I think it's really important to acknowledge there's a difficulty even in knowing the right words to use sometimes. I've talked about people on a low income. That's quite a straightforward phrase that we understand. But low income can miss the point because disadvantage and class are much more complex than just income. It's about your housing and your schooling. Did you have your own bedroom? Did you go to a school where it was normal to get 5, 8, 10 GCSEs? Did you live in an area of very low employment or very high crime? In your family and in your network, did people go to university? Are there professionals? Are there people who can help you get access into industries? The problem as well with talking about low incomes is that we know there's some parts of the country, Bradford, Hastings, West Somerset, where your chances of achieving your potential are incredibly low, even though in absolute income terms, you're not the poorest. We also know that where people have grown up disadvantaged, even where they may have been to university and got a graduate job and be earning a good income, like our students who graduated from our programme, the data shows they will probably still earn less and they will be less likely to progress to the top of their profession than someone from an affluent family. So disadvantage lasts even when you're no longer on a low income and in that environment. It's complicated. Everyone agrees it's complicated. I don't have the answers, but I really want to urge you not to back away from talking about these issues because you're nervous about saying the wrong thing. I also understand that social mobility can feel like an issue that's competing with some of the other priorities to make the industry more inclusive. You know, we know there's a race problem in PR. We know that the number of practitioners with disabilities is underrepresented, and we know we still don't have enough female leaders running the show. So there's a sense in which you kind of wonder, can we afford to take on socioeconomic background as well? Have we got the energy for another fight? The good news is it really doesn't have to be a social background and social class disadvantage. You are reinforcing the efforts that you're making to combat other forms of disadvantage. Racial disadvantage in particular is completely intertwined with social class disadvantage in such a way that actually if you're not paying attention to social class, your efforts to tackle race inequity will ultimately not be fully successful. Also, from a solutions perspective, the things we can do to make our workplaces more inclusive and more welcoming for people from working class backgrounds are absolutely harmonious with the things that will make them more inclusive and more welcoming for everybody. So the change is the same change that we need to make. In terms of the kind of practical steps in an industry level, there are two really critical starting points. One is data and one is leadership, and these things need to go together. We need to measure the kind of baseline, the socioeconomic background data for the workforce. Again, hugely complicated, potentially sort of understand data and get the picture, and people worry about this a great deal, but the three key questions are about, did your parents go to university? When you were 14, what sort of school were you going to? And were you on free school meals? Answer to those three questions can give you a picture of where someone is in terms of their kind of class background and the likelihood to be disadvantaged. It's not perfect, but it's the best analysis we've got. If you've got that data, you can start to understand, okay, where are we in comparison to the benchmarks of where the industry wants to be, and you can start to measure whether we're making change. The reason that needs to go together with leadership is give you that information. People have to trust you to have the right intentions. You have to feel brave enough that if you say, I come from a working class background, you're not going to be discriminated against. Something good is going to happen as a result of that information. You know, some change is going to happen. Your background isn't going to matter in the negative way. So you absolutely have to have, and the industries and the businesses that are good at this have got that honest trust that you can talk about your background, and positive things will happen. This can be really hard. Leaders from privileged backgrounds can be really nervous about talking about this because they can feel they might come across as patronising. If you're a leader who does come from a disadvantaged background, you sometimes don't want to talk about your history now that you're successful. Or worse, you can kind of end up talking all about your history and not bring others over to the cause. So the most important thing is to be honest and open, make a kind of clear personal commitment, and not say too much at the beginning until you know more about what the picture is in the business. My organisation works with young people to offer them opportunities. We work with talented young people who want to get into good universities and top professions, but who don't have the knowledge, they don't have the opportunity, the doors are closed to them. And we work with employers on volunteering programs and structured work experience to help those young people access the opportunities and the knowledge to get in. We also work with employers to benchmark their social mobility practice, to understand and improve their practice through something called the Social Mobility Employers Index. And when we're working with businesses, whether on the programme for young people or benchmarking on the index, we look at kind of 7 different aspects of social mobility. I've already talked about the data baseline, and I've already talked about the leadership commitment. I thought it might be helpful to share a couple of other kind of practical things that organisations are doing. Those who are at the start, where we say to people, look, if you're on this journey at the beginning, here's something you can do. and something that firms with a kind of more developed strategy are doing to really push the envelope. When it comes to work with young people, it's really important to do some outreach, whether that's through schools, through a structured work experience program, through informal connections, but to target that at the places that need your support the most. You know, where your organisation is located, where you are, there will be schools, there will be areas of great deprivation, of what we call social mobility cold spots. They really need your help. Make sure you're targeting and connecting with the areas and the young people who need your help. Don't just go to a school down the road where the young people may already have bags of opportunity. The employers that are going a bit further are actually reserving work experience opportunities for young people from disadvantaged backgrounds. They're positively making, structuring a program to create opportunities to bring people into their industry, into their organisation and learn at the beginning. When it comes to recruitment, the one thing that we work with employers to do at the start is to analyse your recruitment process to make sure it's really looking at the potential to do the job, not the kind of polish, the kind of past academic performance. And this is something that's critical in every organisation to start with. If you are kind of automatically asking for degrees for jobs that don't need them, if you're thinking, oh, well, these people have been to Russell Group universities, they must be terribly clever and that must be a very good sign. Or if your process for recruitment is using, there are stages where people with low socioeconomic backgrounds are being filtered out, and this happens with employers that we work with. Then that is undermining your efforts to include. So there are things that you can do in your recruitment process to really push on potential, not the kind of superficial polish. Some of the employers that we work with to support young people into their recruitment pipelines have got second look processes for candidates from a low socioeconomic background. They are positively wanting to give them additional support, additional opportunities, targeted internships and kind of fast tracking them through. So there are things you can do to really kind of accelerate that progress. And when it comes to kind of progression and senior level, this is the thing that very few employers are good at this. Even the sectors that we've worked with for a long time who've been really, really improving their recruitment and their outreach processes. It's still, as I said at the beginning, really hard to get to senior level if you come from a low socioeconomic background. The one thing that we're working with employers to do to kind of start tackling this is to work with your employees on surveys or focus groups to assess, you know, how is the culture playing out for people from particular backgrounds? Have we got some unintended biases going on? Is the experience that people in your organisation from low socioeconomic backgrounds have, is it different? Is it difficult? Having that kind of honest conversation about how does it feel? Some employers who are really pushing this are looking at measuring their class pay gap. We know across the piece that you are less likely to, even if you've gone to a good university, gone into an industry, you are less likely to earn top money if you come from a working class background. Some employers are looking at really measuring that, pushing themselves to say there's a gap that this is our gap and we want to measure it and we want to close it. Brave, bold stuff. I know not all of you are in leadership positions, and you kind of want to know as well, what can I do as an individual? What can I do today to kind of make a change, make some difference? I think there are two things that everyone can do. One is to be alert to the impact that socioeconomic background can have. You know, look for JDs that say, oh, you know, graduate preferred, when that's nonsense. You don't need to have a degree. Look out if someone is going to be teased about having a Geordie accent or a Scouse accent. Stand up for that and say that's not acceptable in our business, in our workplace. Look out for assumptions that people can pay for travel, people can do free work experience, people can pay for their coffee to take someone out to have a conversation. Spot those things where not having enough money, not having enough understanding of the culture, just not having the knowledge can make a real difference. Be alert to that and be a friend to those people. If your organisation's got a diversity strategy and it doesn't mention class or socioeconomic background, find out why, find out whether it should, ask the question. be an advocate. The other thing that everyone can do who's working in the industry at any level is to be a mentor and share your knowledge. You know some things about how to get on in the industry that would be so valuable to a young person who doesn't know anyone who can share that kind of information with them. It can be quite light touch, you know, taking someone under your wing, or just giving someone a bit of advice about how to dress right for an interview, or spotting someone who you think has got some talent but needs to present themselves better. Or it can be something more structured. You might want to volunteer for a structured mentoring scheme like the one that we run. We take on volunteers to work with our students and mentor them in a structured program. Some of your organisations may have a structured scheme. You may have work experience or an outreach program that you can get involved with. But whether you do it in a big way or a small way, don't undervalue the knowledge that you've gained that someone else could benefit from. People from working class backgrounds do not lack talent. They don't lack aspiration, usually. But sometimes doors are closed to them. Sometimes they don't even know there's a door. They don't even know what jobs they could do, what opportunities there might be. They literally do not have any access to these things. And through our programme, working now with 2,000 young people right through the UK, we can see the difference that opening a door and sharing a bit of knowledge with young people can make. Before we opened the webinar, Rebecca and I were chatting about the way that our work is transformative. I was sharing that when we onboard the young people to the programme, which we've just done for this year's cohort, so they're 16, 17, they're in year 12, S5 in Scotland, they've just joined the programme, and they come to the first launch. At the moment they Zoom into the first launch. They're quite shy, they're quite nervous, they've sort of been encouraged to participate sometimes by their schools. They know they can kind of going to get something useful from it, but they're really shy. They're reluctant to put their hands up. They're really a bit nervous about kind of putting themselves forward. And at those launch events, we have panelists from young people who are further along our programme, sometimes undergraduates who are at university already, sometimes alumni from the programme who are working in their early careers. Sometimes they're year 13, S6, they're only 17, 18, they've only been a year on the programme. But they come to talk to the students about what to expect, how to engage in the programme, what to get out of it, share their advice. And the confidence when they come into the room, introduce themselves, come up to the team to chat, make the students feel welcome, sit on the panel, talk about their experience, share advice. The difference is absolutely palpable. And they've done that. We haven't done that. But through the programme, we've enabled them to find that confidence with some of the knowledge and with some of the support from people who believe in them and opportunities to build their skills. They have found that confidence, they have found that ability, they feel as though they belong, and it means that their talent can shine and is so much more recognisable than it ever would have been. It's the greatest privilege to be able to do that and to be able to create those opportunities for young people to blossom and grow. And we love what we do, but it is sorely needed, because all of you will have been part, I'm sure, of conversations this year about the difference that privilege or lack of privilege has meant to the way we've got through the pandemic. The young people that we work with know, before the pandemic, they knew things were going to be really tough for them. They know now they're really anxious about the extent to which there will be even fewer opportunities, it will be even harder for them, things feel stacked against them. So the difference that we can make by trusting them, working with them, giving them that confidence boost is even more critical. And so I'm even happier than I was before to be in conversations like this, to talk about what we can do to make some change and seize the opportunities. I think that's probably enough from me. I want to hand back to Rebecca, who I think is going to try and open up for some questions and some conversation. Please ask me anything. There's no such thing as a question, too difficult or too challenging. I want to make sure I'm sharing things that are useful to the room, and thank you again.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I think it's really quite inspirational when you hear about kind of the transformation of somebody in, just like you said, just a space of a year, and that is done just by support and kind of being a mentor. And I think that that's something that we probably can all do in our roles, and kind of like just showing that, like giving somebody a little bit of extra help or something, and kind of just giving them a boost, kind of like a metaphorical arm around the shoulder kind of thing. So it's fantastic. So I'm going to close polling. I have had a little peek, I'm afraid. So I asked the question, have you ever felt discriminated against due to your social background? I don't know whether you could predict this result, Sarah, but we've got an overwhelming 83% of people saying yes, with 17% saying no. I didn't expect that to be so high. It's really disappointing to see that. What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, no, I'm sadly I'm not surprised. It's one of those things that throughout my time with SMF and in these conversations, every time we have this conversation, I'm shocked but not surprised. You know, it's shocking because it's so wrong. That people have had experiences of being judged, for your accent, for not knowing the right kind of things to say or do, not dressing properly, that it's assumed that people can afford to do things, understand things, people asking you when you're 35 years old and people asking you what school you went to, as though that's information that anyone, I went to Medhamsley Road Junior. Does that mean anything to you? Didn't think so. But it's shocking, and yet it's not surprising, because this really is pervasive in so many industries and sectors, and because it's often hidden, because it often goes under the radar, and because frankly it's assumed once you are in work that we're all now the same, we're in the same organisation, we're earning the same money, your background doesn't matter anymore. It goes under the radar, and yet if you come from a disadvantaged background, damn well it matters, and you can see and feel it every day.
Yeah, so I'm going to start with it. So I've got some questions for you, Sarah, that I have shared with you ahead of this session. But I'm going to start with one that kind of leads on from that. And it's something that kind of, so I lived in Leeds for 7 years. My mum's from Manchester. I obviously have a very kind of, I have like slight kind of quirks to my accent, let's say. So kind of, sometimes I've been ribbed for it. But it often feels like it's socially acceptable to mock or belittle someone based on their social background. So from the very kind of like, I guess, basic to not the basic, but the smaller, taking the mickey out of somebody's accent, to kind of the lazy stereotypes. So I guess it kind of even just like they use the word chav and stuff like that. What can we all do to combat this, and how can we be better?
So it often, in lots of environments, it can feel socially acceptable. It feels like harmless banter. To talk about people's accents, or as you say, to talk about chavs, or to use pejorative language, or the first thing to do is to stand up for it, to be the person to say, look, that's not cool, that's not what we do here. The second thing is to make sure it's true, that it's not what you do there. The culture in an organisation, those kinds of indications of whether, as a person from a working class background, you are in the minority. You either have to hide it, or it has to become a sort of fun persona that you take on. That's a burden. I said when I talked that many of the things that you need to do to address social class disadvantage are the same things you have to do to address race disadvantage. And the language is so common, it's so familiar, that people from working class backgrounds exactly the same as people who are in the minority in terms of ethnicity say. It's the burden of the kind of work I have to do. I have to be this perfect person who never lets her class background kind of get in the way, or I have to be this sort of comedy figure, comedy scouser, and kind of show that I don't mind it. And that's kind of a lot for me to take on. So it as an individual, kind of challenging that and saying that is just not cool, that's just not okay, is absolutely something to do. But also working on making sure, if those sorts of comments are being passed, then it's a good sign that the culture in your organisation is not where you want it to be in terms of inclusiveness. And that's actually something to follow up and say, look, it I think we need to understand this. I would be good to do the employee survey and understand, as you say, take that poll in your organisation, because if your chief exec knew that 80% of people in his organisation from a working class background felt they'd been discriminated against, if that doesn't kind of wallop you in the gut as a senior person, then it really should. And I think most senior people would be shocked to hear that, and would not want that to be the case. So it gives an opportunity to explore. But again, it's tough. It's tough on people from the background to have to do the work. So if you're in this call and you're not from a working class background, be an ally, be a supporter. Just as much say it's not cool.
Yeah, I think it's the phrase that I've heard a lot kind of is around emotional labour, and it's unfair to put all the emotional labour on the people who are being discriminated against or are in the minority. It's tiring at times to be that person to educate constantly. So kind of moving on from that, what steps can organisations take to ensure they're not excluding people from disadvantaged backgrounds? So I kind of want to split it into, we've kind of touched on like the application process, so kind of, I guess, like the degree required kind of, but also with their current staff as well. So we've touched on both slightly, but kind of just to expand on that.
Yeah. So there's getting in and there's getting on. And you have to have something that kind of addresses both. One of the things, my organisation has been working with law firms, big law, Magic Circle Law, and kind of professional services, who have known for a long time they have a social mobility problem, and have been working on this for a long time. And for a lot of them, the assumption was if you work on the getting in part, if you kind of have a pipeline, it will all work itself out. And firstly, that's going to take too long. Ain't nobody got time to kind of hang around and say, well, in 35 years it'll all be all right. But secondly, we know that's not true. We know that from all the work we've done on gender, that we're all still waiting for women to get to the top of those organisations. We've been recruiting women to those organisations at parity for 40 years already. So it's not, pipeline isn't enough. But you absolutely do have to have the pipeline of talent coming in. And then you have to have a focus on the kind of getting on and the environment. So I think the critical thing is you cannot do this without some sort of data baseline. You have to know your numbers. Firstly, because knowing your numbers confronts you as an organisation with kind of, are we happy with that? Are we okay with that? And that kind of shock sometimes, exactly as we just had with that poll, but that kind of shock sometimes that that the population is 7% private school, 93% state school. If in our organisation we're 60-40, are we okay with that? Is that where we want to be? And that kind of shock can in itself make a difference to the sort of momentum. But it absolutely lets you be ruthless about saying, is what we're doing working? Because you can put a lot of effort into outreach programs into schools, for example, and that can make you feel be warm and supportive for your employees and make you feel better. But if it doesn't make a blind difference to anything that's happening in terms of your recruitment pipeline, then you need to push yourselves and say, okay, we need to tie that together. We're not just doing nice chats in schools about PR. We actually need to be making sure that some of those young people get invited into our organisation. That we invite some of them back to do an internship, that we invite some of them back again onto the entry scheme. In terms of the getting on piece, again, I think the kind of baseline of those the workforce, but also those perceptions, having that conversation. One of the things that any business who enters our Social Mobility Employers Index, we offer them as part of their assessment is an employee survey that they can run that asks exactly the sort of questions we've just done. Have you been discriminated against? Do you think it's fair? Does your background matter? Do you think your workplace is an inclusive one? And we look at that. You can look at that and compare it between employees from a more privileged background and employees from a less privileged background. And again, it enables the organisation to say, that is this the environment that we want, and is this the environment that is going to foster the right sorts of things happening? Again, mentorship can be critically important. You don't just need a mentor to get into a business. understanding and supporting people, making sure that networks are there for people who from a low-income background that you want to progress, kind of actively making sure that they're supported, brought into the room. These are the sorts of things that make a difference. But in the end, the thing that really makes a difference is the leadership caring about this and prioritising it, and that's the thing that drives real change in every sector that we work in, is when someone senior really gets this and says, I am going to make this happen. I am going to put my time into making this happen.
Yeah.
And that can unlock things in a big way.
It's the old phrase of lead by example, and it kind of we can kind of like try our best at grassroots and kind of push up, but I guess like we have to have the support from the top as well as kind of like doing the work at the bottom. But fingers crossed we're kind of going to move into that way. And what you said about kind of the network as well, I think that probably that will ring true for so many people, that if you don't have that connection, if you don't have the kind of school or background connection that maybe a lot of people do that they take for granted, it's like they don't get those internships, their work experience, because their name isn't in the right place. They're not visible. So I think that's something that kind of I know that I would need to kind of really reconsider, like, hang on, who could we be excluding because we're just not thinking outside of our group, so to speak. So I'm going to try and be a bit more positive. The past 12 months have seen a lot of organisations move to home working. Obviously, we're both sat in our homes due to the pandemic, and it looks like this will continue in some form in the future. Do you think this is needed to improve social mobility?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, because I think certainly home working and kind of rise of digital and virtual working can make a fantastic difference. I think it's dangerous if we assume it just will by itself automatically help, because actually there can be some things that are really challenging about, if we're all in our home environment, and some of us are in a nicer home environment than others, some of us are in a more comfortable home environment, then the sort of the levelling can be very false. We work with students on our programme, the majority of the students on our programme are on free school meals. The ones who aren't are still in quite low income families and communities. They have been trying to study and also engage with the programme virtually. Some of them in really tricky domestic situations. We've made sure that they get the kit that they need, but there's still some of them in, sharing a room with 2 or 3 siblings, trying to share the Wi-Fi, trying to share the space. It can be really challenging setup to get quiet time to concentrate. So I think remembering that a virtual setup means everyone is more reliant on their domestic circumstances, and kind of understanding and supporting that is really critical for it to be positive. But there definitely are some positives. We've been able through the last year to offer genuine parity of opportunity to our students wherever in the country they come from. We do a work experience programme with the Bank of England for some of our banking students, and because of the virtual nature of it, Andrew Bailey, the Governor of the Bank of England, came and did talk to our students, and if we'd been able to, we probably wouldn't have got him anyway outside the pandemic, because he'd have probably been trotting around the world, but also if we had ever got him, he would have been in London talking to London students, but we were able to make sure that he talked to all of our students, Newcastle, Bradford, West Highland, Scotland, Isle of Wight. So the kind of parity of opportunity, the ability to see that it doesn't matter where you are, the kind of access and opportunity can be the same. That's quite powerful in terms of unlocking opportunity for people from different backgrounds and different opportunities. And also I think the fact that we're all having to learn this new environment, everybody's had to have help in navigating a kind of digital workplace. Again, there's an opportunity there. It doesn't automatically mean that will be a leveller. We'd be mad to think it did, but it does give an opportunity to say, okay, if we're all learning this together, then we can bring people along and support people to be learning this new environment together, whatever their previous experience and opportunity. There definitely are potential good things about the changes that we're making.
Fantastic. So I've seen we've got a couple of questions, so I'm just going to go straight to my last question, which I think what I kind of love about doing these sessions is that our audience is always so engaged, and I think everybody on that's joining us wants to be better. So how can we all advocate for better social mobility? So not just in the workplace, but also in our personal lives as well. Like how can we either be an ally or kind of be better to kind of support those from a different background?
Yeah. Once you start kind of being active about it, once you start actively noticing, there are so many times and places where you notice that the lack of money and the lack of the things that often go with money that I've talked about, the sort of circumstances, situations. Once you start noticing it, you start noticing the extent to which the world is kind of shaped to benefit people who are more privileged. And so once you start being alert to it, you can start being an advocate in every opportunity, because you just clock it and say, that is, I'll give you what might feel a silly example, but it's really pervasive. You know those pieces you often get in the kind of weekend papers about kind of how I managed to save up to buy my flat, and then nearly always people are like, oh, I just lived with my parents for 5 years and saved a load of money, and you think, oh, well, good for you that you lived with your parents and could still do your job because your parents had room for you and were in London where there was a job. You just think that's ordinary, but actually that's an example of huge privilege which helped you to do that. If you clock those sorts of things and you notice them and you say, that's a bit of privilege going on there, which not everybody has. You start to be alert to that and you start to spot them, then you're starting to have the conversation that helps people to notice that stops it going under the radar. The best thing we can do for social mobility is just to talk about it more and talk about the extent to which, you know, it's right here, it's a real issue. Because nobody thinks that's fair, nobody thinks that's okay, and nobody wants to say, well, you know, just how life is, isn't it? But you have to expose it and talk about it to get people to confront that it isn't something that just happened in the 60s, it's happening right now.
Yeah, I think it's the hardest thing to do, but it's also like the easiest thing. It's like, let's just start talking about it more, and rather than kind of brushing it away and be like, oh, that's an awkward conversation, I don't know what to say in that, just have it really. Right, so we've had obviously, as always, a bunch of questions come in, so I will go to the first one here, which says, when talking about social mobility more widely, what is the best phrasing to use? Disadvantaged, underrepresented, low income? So that's a fantastic question, really.
Yeah, good question. So the best phrase to use, it depends partly on context. So, for example, when it comes to our programs, we are working with, as I say, you know, very disadvantaged young people. They're on free school meals, most of them. They're at schools that will not be able to support them. So when I'm talking about the young people on our program, I do talk about disadvantaged, and they know they are disadvantaged. They are confident, they're comfortable with that. They know how tough stuff is for them, that they don't have things that people do. But when I'm talking more broadly about social mobility, I sometimes talk about class, and I sometimes talk just about ordinary people, actually, because depending on what we're thinking about, you know, when we're working with our young people on the program, we are choosing the most disadvantaged to give the biggest boost. But in some cases, in some professions, you know, frankly, when we're talking about progression to the top of the financial services sector, for example, we talk about ordinary people, because actually I would love it if we could get somewhere near kind of the 7% of people who went to private school not being 55% of the people in senior positions in financial services. So in that context, I would talk about ordinary people, because I'm actually talking about just getting us slightly back more towards the general population. I think the other thing, and I said this when I was talking, is don't worry if you are worrying about the language and that's kind of silencing you. Don't worry. Again, just as with as we've come to understand when it comes to debates about race and ethnicity, you know, the awkwardness of saying the wrong thing and therefore saying nothing is a killer for this topic. You know, if you want to say, I'm going to talk about disadvantage, and what I mean by that is this, or if you want to say, you know, I'm going to talk about class because I want to talk not just about financial disadvantage and low income, but I want to acknowledge that there are kind of social and cultural issues. Say the words you're going to use, say why you've chosen them, and be ready to hear that someone is going to say to you, I would rather you didn't describe me as that, thanks. And approach that with kind of honesty, and people will be people will notice the intent, and will have faith in the intent, I promise.
Yeah, I think that's the key, isn't it, really? If your intent is good and you are willing to listen and say, I apologise, I will refer to you as X from now on, or use this term, it shows that you've listened, you've learned, and you've made a change. So I think that, and which is essentially what we're trying to do here. So we've had a question come in the chat. Oh gosh, I think that's a bit of a tricky one. I've had a manager confide that they are worried about hiring me as perhaps I was too working class. So they thought I was a risk despite being the far more qualified candidate. They justified it by stating that PR/comms needs snoozing and presentation. How do we break down the idea that being presentable or a good communicator is the same as being middle class? I mean, that is depressing.
It's pretty depressing, isn't it? And it's laughable, really. I mean, like, we get this in financial services and law. We get the same thing. We're going to be dealing with some terribly kind of important and wealthy people, and we don't want them to feel uncomfortable by having to deal with someone from an accent. I mean, the first thing is you probably are well off out of that organisation, because that's not a good person to work for. But the worry is that if all the decision makers are in that position and you want to be successful in the industry, that you and your moral high ground might be a bit cold at night. So I mean, in practical terms, clients are often not nearly as snobbish, not nearly as uncomfortable about all of this as we think they are. And again, we've absolutely found this in financial services, in law, in kind of asset management. They want to know that you're good with your money. They want to know that you're good with the advice that you're giving me. Your clients in PR want to know, are you going to get your good coverage? Is my reputation going to improve? Are you understand my product and my market? So that's the client evidence, and the kind of clients that you can bring and the clients that you can bring to support your case are really important as part of making the change more broadly in the sector. Increasingly, especially when it comes to digital PR and engagement with young people, understanding of the market, understanding of the product, understanding of the channels is the thing that you've got to bring. So bring your strength, marshal your argument, make sure you've got clients that you can, that will back you. And then more fool the hiring person, but also this sense of kind of that only posh people know how to do schmoozing. I mean, that is on a literal sense true, because if you have grown up in that environment, you do know how to do it, and if you haven't grown up in that environment, you do not know how to do it. That's where the mentoring and the sharing of knowledge can be absolutely critical. Of course you don't know how to dress or how to handle yourself in a fancy restaurant if you've never been to one, but once you do know how to do that. And it turns out it wasn't such innate brilliance, it was just knowing how to do something. So sharing that knowledge and supporting people to share that incredible secret that you start with the outside and work in on the cutlery or whatever the hell it is, sharing that knowledge and kind of breaking down that polish is anything other than just a bit of learned behaviour is critical to this. But I'm so sorry that happened, because that's stupid and that's wasteful of your talent, and that's also puts that burden on you to feel as though you've done something wrong, when actually the stupid person who thinks that that's a way to behave is the one who's done something wrong and should be ashamed of him or herself.
Yeah, 100%. So I mean, like, now we've just busted the myth around schmoozing. Everybody's going to be able to do it now, so we've cracked it wide open. So we've probably got time for one last question. I know that we've overrun slightly, but as lockdown eases and offices open up again, do you think there will be a further imbalance between those that can work from their suitable home environment, perhaps living in different areas because they don't have to regularly commute, while those that need the office more will be effectively left behind?
I think that is a risk. And as I said, I think if we assume that good things will come, or that equity will be kind of built into our return to office working or hybrid working or blended working or whatever we do, I think if we assume there's equity in that without conscious efforts, then we'll build in the same kind of harmful things that we inherited. I think what's the exciting opportunity is that radical change is happening. We are making radical changes to all sorts of things, economy, society, the way that we work, the way that we engage, everything. So slipping in a bit more radical change when it comes to social mobility as part of that is going to be easier now than it has been. But again, I think we need to be really mindful, exactly as you say, we need to assess those plans. We need to make sure that we're understanding the setup that people are in and their needs, exactly the same way that we understand that a kind of physical environment, isn't going to be helpful for people with some disabilities, understanding that a kind of blended working environment, kind of what do you need, what's going to be helpful to you, making sure that people are supported in all of that. And kind of recognising that, and some of that happens on a kind of organisational level, making sure that the plan is kind of mindful and offering support, and some of that comes on an individual level, supporting individuals to be able to be honest with you about saying, actually I really need to work from the office because there are 4 of us around the kitchen table and it isn't working for me. And if you're open to that kind of conversation and honesty, and someone in your organisation knows they can say that without someone going, oh, well, we better take you off that account because I don't think they'll want the likes of you on there. If you've got that confidence and that trust, then you have the conversations about, okay, how can we just make this easier for you? How can we, of course you get first dibs on the office environment, or of course we won't be expecting you to run the webinar from home. So an opportunity to have an honest conversation.
Fantastic. And we've got one last question, which I think will probably help the person who had the 2 working class. I mean, that's really, really angered me. If we notice someone in a senior position being dismissive or making fun of someone for their accent or background as banter, I hate that word anyway, how should we bring it up without making the senior defensive, and how best can we make them listen or change?
Yeah, I mean, this is about a broader culture which the senior person both sets but also kind of reflects. The culture is very rarely down to kind of one person's behaviour. So, I mean, my approach would be to assume that there is good intent and bad execution, and treat the person in that way until you know different. So, I would speak separately both to the senior person privately and say, look, it can make people feel really awkward. That kind of thing is actually, reflective of. I would also talk to the person who is on the receiving end of the comments and say, I didn't think that was okay. Not, how do you feel about that? But just, I didn't think that was okay. I didn't think that was good way to talk to you. I wasn't very happy about that, because you do 2 things in that. You give if you assume good intent of the senior and give them some information, you may get a change, you may not, but you give the opportunity for people to get it right before you need to move to saying, oh, you're not trying now. But also being an ally to the person who's on the receiving end, not asking them, do you want to complain about that? I'll back you up. Or do you, how do you feel about that? Just saying to them, I didn't think that was okay. Almost, I don't care whether you were okay with that or not. I didn't think that was okay. It's really important to show people that there is an ally, that there is some recognition. It's starting to make some steps to creating an environment in which people feel that their background and their accent isn't something that they have to bear alone. If the senior person wants to engage and wants to learn a bit more, that's a great opportunity then to start some conversations about social mobility and social economic disadvantage and what's not. If the senior person doesn't want to, and tells you, you're a humorless fun sponge or whatever it is that they tell you, then what the senior leadership in your organisation is kind of feeling about that sort of stuff, and it's a signal there to understand what you're up against. But in my experience, it is often ignorance. People just don't, like I say, it's just not something people have ever thought about as being, something that someone would know. They should never tease someone about the colour of their skin or their disability. It would just never have crossed their mind that the same thing could happen when it comes to someone's accent or class background.
Yeah, I think you're completely right. It's kind of one of the last remaining things that is still fine to do, or seems to be fine to do. And thank you. We have run over and I'm so sorry, but I think there were so many questions and people kind of were enjoying it. So I kind of made the executive decision to continue. Thank you so much, Sarah. It's been absolutely fantastic and eye-opening and inspiring. Thank you again.
Thank you for having me. Thank you, everyone. Follow us on social media and have a look at the Social Mobility Employers Index. And if anyone wants to volunteer for the programme, or if anyone feels like challenging their boss to come and get on board in terms of the index, we're here to help because we want to make some change too. So we too want to partner with allies. So yeah, do be in touch if anyone's interested. But thank you, everyone, for having me to talk to you today.
Fantastic. Thank you. And thank you everybody for joining us as well. And take care and enjoy the rest of your days. Bye.